abre mis labios y mi boca proclamará tus alabanzas. Lord, open my lips, and my mouth shall proclaim your praise. Amen. So there was a trial, and by use of manipulating and false testimony, an innocent man was tortured and killed. And the crowd stood around, a crowd who had just a few days before welcomed him with cries of Hosanna and blessed be the one who comes in the name of the Lord, and the King of glory had now turned against him and were crying out for his conviction. There's a kind of a psychological factor that happens, when people are in a group and they're influenced by kind of a mass, I won't call it hysteria, but a sense of a mass feeling in common. There's also another phenomenon called willful ignorance. And this is the case when a person intentionally decides not to see or accept reality, facts, proof, and or truth. And often, this phenomenon can also be greatly enhanced by the presence of others. And I can only imagine that that was also present at Jesus' trial. So why would this crowd decide to turn against an innocent man? Well, it's not that strange. The Innocence Project has exonerated 337 prisoners through DNA proof. And that's only the ones that they have gotten to. There are many, many more cases that are still to be investigated. But 337 that we know of were innocent and were sitting in jail, some of them on death row. Now, eyewitness misidentification is the greatest contributor to these wrongful convictions. In 70% of those convictions that were overturned by DNA, they were convicted originally by misidentification. And by a wide margin, it happens to black people. Now, however tragic that number is, there's a deeper malady in our injustice. In 48 cases of people who were originally convicted, in 48 cases they were convicted due to government misconduct. That means that either the police, the prosecutors, witnesses were coerced. Somehow the government had a hand in these wrongful convictions. 48. Spread all over the country. So there's a lot of people who still refuse to believe that our justice system needs some serious correction. Unfortunately, there's a lot of willful ignorance rampant in our country right now. Now, the biggest one for the longest time was about climate change. In the face of overwhelming evidence, hordes of scientists, and sometimes even our own lived experience, there are people who have decided that climate change is not real, that this is something of a hoax, that it's made up. Now, it appears that one way of convincing the masses to accept a lie is to repeatedly make these false claims and to do it loudly. And the more often that lie is told, and the more vehemently it is told, the easier it is for people to decide to accept the lie. even at the expense of their own common sense. For many years, there was widespread denial that we have a problem with homelessness here in Walnut Creek. Many people that I spoke to said Walnut Creek does not have a homeless problem. But we decided to address that problem, and the more we learned about it, the more we understood and knew and realized that indeed we do have a homeless problem in Walnut Creek. And thank God we are deeply involved in addressing this issue. About 4 years ago, I attended a clergy dinner, ecumenical clergy dinner. And I met a pastor that's working in Oakland. And his ministry, his church's ministry, was to help people who were formerly sex slaves. And so he gave me information and so forth, gave me papers and gave me his phone number, invited me to come to and see the ministry that they had been doing. Now, I assumed that these people were foreigners, people who had been imported to by smugglers and so forth to do this awful thing. But it turns out that these were Americans, and mostly young girls. American young girls in this area, in the Bay Area, are right now, at this very moment, being held as slaves for sex. Right now, in our area. Now, these are sobering thoughts, and I'm sure that they make us feel uncomfortable. The pastor that I spoke to 4 years ago gave me information about his ministry, and I kept it on my desk for years, and I never checked it out. Because the truth of the situation was just too horrible for me to face. And I knew that if I looked into it, I would have to do something about it. So I ignored it. I looked at it from time to time. It would get buried underneath the mountains of papers that are on my desk. And every once in a while, in a cleaning frenzy, I would go through all my papers, and there it be. There's that paper that minister gave me about this situation. So finally, I had to face the reality that I wasn't going to do anything about it. I was focusing on the ministry that we're doing here in our church. But it kept nagging at me. But I had to stop and decide, with the limited time, resources, energy, money, spiritual capital that I have, where am I going to spend that time? We're all limited. We all have limitations. And as we become aware of these terrible things that are all around us, we have to decide. Because while I know that God wanted me to be aware of this horror, it was not so that I necessarily had to do something about it. Because I have to be a steward of what God has given me to do. And we have a prayer in our liturgy to give us the strength to do the things that God has asked us to do. And there are things that God has asked us to do, things that have been placed literally at our doorstep. And homelessness is one of those things. And feeding is another one of those things that come into our reality, into our physical space, and that we are being called to address. And so we respond to that call. But I had to accept that I couldn't do that particular ministry. There's many ministries, many situations that we have to do something about, or let me rephrase that. That's my mind saying it all the time. I have to do something about it, but that's not the case. We should be aware about it. And the thing that makes it bad is when it's so bad that we deny it's there. I think that's the bigger problem for us to deny that there is a problem. Now, once we accept that there is a problem, then we as individuals have to decide whether or not God is calling us to address that particular issue. As a parish, we've been called to address some issues, and we're doing it. We're doing those things that God is calling us to do. But when we come across other issues that we're not doing anything about, it's not a question of feeling guilty or feeling terrible about not doing it, but just keeping those things in our heart. Pray for them. Support them in some way or another, particularly by speaking to others about it once you hear about it, once you know about it. Because it could be that in our telling of these situations, we will come across someone for whom this is a true call, who will be able to champion that situation. And it may not be us. When we go to Honduras, we're faced with enormous challenges, enormous poverty, enormous health concerns. A whole range of very, very big problems. And we know that we can't deal with all of them. So we focus on the things that we can do something about. We do the best that we can with the peace that we have been given, with the chunk of ministry that falls to us. It's tempting to pretend that those other problems don't exist. It's kind of a way out for us. But that's worse than not doing anything about it, is to pretend that there isn't a problem. So our call is not to take care of everything. We are expected to do something. All of us, every single one of us, no matter what our age, no matter what our resources, no matter what, all of us are called to do something about the issues that we see that surround us. So while we're not expected to do something about everything or anything about everything, we are called to do something. So if you are not involved in some way in helping heal the wounds, the tragedies that surround us, then I encourage you to find one that speaks to your heart. Find that one thing that you can do something about. And that's all. That's it. That's what God is asking us to do. Just our part. And when we come across those things that we didn't know about, be willing to spread the word about those situations. It's the thing that can make evil flourish. It's a famous saying. Evil flourishes when good people do nothing. So as we contemplate those things that Jesus experienced, that mob mentality that allowed the crucifixion to go forward, we have to be the ones to stand up and say, no, this is not right. And I don't know, maybe they couldn't have stopped the crucifixion. Maybe they couldn't have made a difference. But their example would have made a huge difference. Just like our example can make a huge difference when we stand up in the face of overwhelming odds and say, we're going to do something about this issue. There is a problem, and I'm going to do my part, And I invite you to do your part. This is the call. This is what God is asking us to do. And that God knows we're capable of doing. Because God does not ask us to do things we're not capable of. That's the other thing about our relationship with God, is that when God is calling us into a ministry, God calls us because we can do something about that ministry. So look at it. Look at the things that you hear about. And don't get caught up in feeling overwhelmed. But have the courage to look at it and decide, is this something I can do something about? And if not, then let it go. Let other people know about it. But if there is something that you can do, then please do it. Amen.